Now, when it comes to making these Skylanders videos, I pretty much recorded almost every level between Skylanders Swap Force and Skylanders Trap Team, and most of the time I would usually have to go back to certain levels with different Skylanders. But when it comes to Skylanders as a whole franchise, I think the level that I've returned to the most is the first level of Skylanders Swap Force, Mount Cloudbreak. I don't know why, but this level, along with Cascade Glades, has always had a soft spot for me, even when I was on the Wii, and I replayed these levels constantly as a kid because they were just that good, alongside Rampart Ruins. But as time has gone on, I began to notice a lot of stuff that I hadn't noticed before. Is this because I'm older now and I know how to slow down? Maybe, but there's just a lot of stuff that I want to talk about when it comes to this level specifically, mainly as much of the little things that you can miss as possible. So that's what we're going to do today, but before that I need to explain some things. Firstly, this is not a breakdown of the story of the level itself, but instead me just talking about the little things I was able to see and find. And secondly, I know for a fact that I did not find everything, so if you spotted anything else, tell me about it in the description down below. We're going to be talking about the first level of Skylanders Swap Force, Mount Cloudbreak, along with the little details that come along with it. But before we get into that, let's talk about the cutscene that precedes it. Now, when it comes to Skylanders introductions, I'm pretty sure that this one is probably in the middle of the road when it comes to the others. It's pretty damn similar to Trap Team's, Giants, and Spyro's Adventures, but it is able to stand out a little bit. But for me, it's one of the most nostalgic since, well, I played this game since I was 6. But there are also some little details that I want to point out when it comes to this cutscene. Now, when it comes to the group that we see in the flyby, it consists of Spyro, Trigger Happy, Gilgrunt, Eruptor, Jetvac, and surprisingly, Series 3 Stealth Elf. And the reason I see this as surprising is because Series 1 or Series 2 is just way more familiar. But considering the fact that she was part of the starter pack, it does make a lot of sense here. We then get to see the Swap Force in action defending the Elementals while they restore Skyland's magic at Mount Cloudbreak, and there's also a couple of things I noticed here as well. Firstly, the Swap Force Skylanders that we see in this cutscene are Stink Bomb, Night Shift, Blast Zone, Washbuckler, Free Ranger, Freeze Blade, and Magnetarch, and I'm pretty sure that we all recognize that that is an uneven number, but I promise I'll get to that in a second. We get to see them fight a mysterious figure and their Fire Vipers, which most of us already know is Cassandra because 1, she literally says it later in the game, and 2, when the figure laughs, it's in her voice. Anyways, the Skylanders present fend her off in her legion of Fire Vipers, and because of this, they end up being too close to Mount Cloudbreak when it erupts, and they all get sucked in and banished to Earth. But I also noticed something else in this cutscene as well. Free Ranger straight up vanishes from the cutscene after they get sucked in. After we see him get sucked in with the other Skylanders and they all swap top and bottom halves, when we see them all get sucked in deeper after discovering their new abilities, Free Ranger is just gone, along with Night Bomb, and if you don't believe me, I counted them individually throughout this cutscene and they both straight up vanish right after this point, which just makes me wonder, why was Free Ranger even included in the first place? Hell, now that I think about it, Free Ranger didn't really do anything in the cutscene. He just tornadoes over to the volcano, poses for the camera twice, and gets sucked in. Anyways, after Eon does some more talking, we cut to Flynn talking to Callie and Hugo over a monitor. And funnily enough, I think this is the only time that they actually appear in this game. But after that, Flynn gets to meet Tessa, she catches him up on the situation, and they go into the volcano in an attempt to outrun the Greebles. But we do get to see a little sheep here, and I'm not exactly sure, but Flynn's hat might actually be a hat in the game. Editor me, you're on it. There's also some smaller details here as well, the more noticeable being the fact that the bright blue sky changes to a gray one moments before Flynn loses his volcano hat. Flynn also refers to Whiskers as a flying chicken in this cutscene as well, and he continues to call him that in Cascade Glades, and he probably does it somewhere else in the game now that I think about it. And weirdly enough, this cutscene is rendered differently from most of the others in this game. Flynn and Tessa even have what I think is different models. But with that out the way, let's get into the gameplay. Now, before we even summon our Skylander, we already have a small detail to discuss, and it mainly involves Flynn. Now, we all know when Tessa tells him to bank up, he basically crashes into the floor of the volcano. And this is sort of speculation, but I'm pretty sure that the reason why this happened is because Flynn doesn't know what bank up means. And I have 2 things to back this up. Firstly, in Trap Team, we learned that Flynn doesn't have a license because, well, he doesn't know what it is, if I'm remembering the cutscene correctly. And secondly, later in this section, he tells us that a Greeble airship is off the port bow. But there's one problem. The port bow is the left side of the ship, while the Air Baron is in the front of the ship. And then he goes on to say starboard, which is the right side of the ship. Another thing to point out, if you're playing this level for the first time, you will always have the portal animation for your Skylander before you can play. But if you're replaying the level, that part is skipped over entirely and the Skylander just appears in the level. Anyways, after you fight off a couple of chompies, you eventually pass the core of the volcano. And what's crazy is that this is where you fight Chaos in the last level. Or at least that's where I think you fight him. Even though things are kinda off proportion wise, you can actually see parts of this structure in the boss fight and the platform he's standing on. And this shot kinda shows off how big Chaos was in that fight. There's also the fact that the Greebles we see in their cutscene have survived the crash into the pillar, as the number of Greebles that show up on the ship are the same as the Greebles in the cutscene. Anyways, after you, Flynn, and Tessa escape the Barons and start the level, Eon makes an appearance as a voice to explain certain things like jumping, and he also makes multiple appearances across the games to explain other certain mechanics. As you continue through the level, you eventually come across a bridge that a Greeble airship crashes into, which forces you to go the other way around. But what's interesting is that the airship is on fire before it crashes into the bridge, so it's possible that it was shot down by someone. Another thing that I want to point out is that this level's collectibles aren't the only piece of Flynn's things that somehow managed to get spread across the level, as many of the breakable objects are suitcases, which is the complete opposite of the pots around the area. But take this with a grain of salt, since these suitcases and briefcases end up in some weird ass places that they really shouldn't be. After you continue through the level, fighting through your first battle gate where you get to see chompies on platforms as you fall, you eventually come across this area full of caged animals, where you're supposed to talk to Tessa, but you can actually skip the dialogue by jumping over this crate. But you can go back and trigger the dialogue after fighting the screwball, and this is where we hear Whisker's name for the first time. What's interesting about this crate specifically is that in the Cursed Wii version of this game, you actually cannot jump over the crate, and I'm not exactly sure why. And speaking of the crates, all the crates in this area contain some sort of creature like a slug, bear thing, or a bog hog. This is pretty interesting considering the fact that the only other place we see them besides Cassandra's boss fight is Mudwater Hollow, which implies to me that they are rather close to each other compared to the other locations in Cloudbreak. Anyways, after fighting off more Greebles and rescuing Miss Poppy along with a few other foxes, you can actually see a couple of chompies running up this tree over here, and later into the level, you can see a pair of Greebles tracing a bog hog up another tree before being chased back down by said bog hog. And after that, you get to the life and dual fire and water elemental gates, and there are only a few things I want to talk about here. Now, before we even get to the gates themselves, the character that explains them to us is named Mr. Yappy, which is kind of funny if you take into account how long this explanation actually is. Vicarious probably knew that and gave him that name as a joke. For the life gate, the spikes that you see actually make an appearance in Rampart Ruins, and the two characters behind this gate are called Lieutenant Wolf and Little Bro Pete, which are obvious plays on Little Bo Peep and the Big Bad Wolf. For the water gate, the background lighting actually changes slightly to fit the atmosphere, but it is appropriate to bring up that it just becomes a dark blue in the Wii version of the game. After doing the gates and running through the level some more and doing the swap zone, which I couldn't really find anything in, you'll eventually find a chompy pod and go through this area here called Honey Trove. And interestingly enough, there's actually some damaged parts of the hive that allow you to look outside over here. After once again continuing through the level, you can go through this air gate here with the turret section, and even though it isn't much, the balloons are actually held up by boulders and not baskets. There's also the climb swap zone exploring this other hive with giant chests inside, and I didn't really see any other things in particular, but you'll eventually come across another group and free them. And this is where the little details come back to the picture again, or at least the ones that I saw. Now, normally you would see the gate up here and just go to the hive to get the key, but if you just walk up to the gate, one of the foxes will just tell you to go into the beehive to get the key. Oh, and one more thing. I vividly remember how damn bright these hives were on the Wii, probably because of hardware limitations. But let's be serious here, anything that was put on the Wii that wasn't a Nintendo game had hardware limitations. Anyways, after going through the level some more and riding on another vine section, you'll eventually make it to Woodburrow's gates, where most of the cages are empty, besides a couple with a few bears in it. But there is some stuff I want to talk about in the dig swap zone. Firstly, and probably the most obvious, the spikes are actually recolored versions of the ones we've seen before, and the gem cluster things that you dig up actually float towards you once you dig them up, even when you try to walk away from them. Once you're done with that, you get to fight Greebles and Chompies at the gate, and if you look hard enough, you can actually see people behind it, but I'm not exactly sure what they're doing. You could also see the silhouettes of Greeble airships fly over, and one actually crashes nearby during the fight, which makes me wonder if they are just naturally bad at driving because holy hell, this is twice and the only turret we're aware of is one back over at the air gate. With all of that said and done, I'm pretty sure that this is where the details that I could find come to an end, along with this level. I know that this is kind of a new type of video to be posting, but honestly, I'm kind of getting sick and tired of talking about the Skylanders and their backstories, and I kind of want to do something a little new. Doing 3 Skylanders every week kind of gets repetitive and draining, but I'm still going to complete all of them, so don't worry about that. But with all of that said and done, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow the channel, check out the Return to Skylands series in the description down below, along with the music for this video and Return to Skylands official Discord, and I will see you all in the next one.